What is up, Rad Potential YouTube? I'm Mr. Rad, and in today's video, I'm going to be strapping the biggest turbo that I've ever bought to the FD RX8 with my hybrid Renesis engine. We've done tons of fab work since you guys have last saw the car, so let me update you on the fab work, and let's get this turbo kit, intercooler, radiator, all the coolers, the front end. It's going to look like a complete FD RX7 in this video, and ultimately, I think we might be able to make this thing faster than most FD RX7s. So let's get right to it. So in light of the amount of cameras I've destroyed, throwing grinding and welding sparks at them, Mr. Rad the fabricator knocked out all of this sheet metal work off camera but on time lapse. So I'm just going to show you a little quick snippet of what this looked like before, and then check out this sheet metal work with the engine back in here. So if you remember, there were big holes back here where I had just kind of fitted the front of the RX8 onto the FD, but not quite finished it out. So this isn't done yet. Still have some seam sealing to do, and obviously engine bay paint, of which I'm still torn on what color to paint the engine bay. I'm actually thinking about just doing it silver, because if I do the bay silver, then I can paint the rest of the car whatever color red I want, and it doesn't have to match, and it's just going to be a race car. It's not really like a show car, although all show cars are race cars, but at the same time, I'm not trying to like be really impressive like the RX7 or the RX8 will be, where everything's like perfectly pristine and matchy. Like, I'm kind of anticipating stuffing this one into a wall or something and like being able to just patch it up. So silver it probably is, but the sheet metal work, I'm super stoked with how it looks. It's not really like a, you know, Good Guys Rod and Custom crazy shaved firewall, but I left some of the mangledness just to show you guys how totaled it was. I cut out this section right here because where the ECU wiring and the AC stuff went through, it was just so mangled that I couldn't hammer and dolly it straight, and there's really like nothing that's going to be happening in this back corner. We'll have our downpipe, but because of the downpipe, I don't think I'm going to put anything back here. I'm probably going to bring the ECU wiring like through the firewall up here under the engine, because there's no heater core or anything in this car either, so it will literally look like a really tucked and shaved bay, albeit it still is a totaled RX7 with an RX8 front frame rail section welded on by somebody who's like not a 30-year Hall of Fame hot rod fabricator. So it's complete on both sides. So, you know, some seam sealer, but I can lay some mega good beads with seam sealer, so it'll look really nicely welded. Definitely it's not going anywhere, and at this point I'm ready to reinstall the engine and hang the turbo and start putting all the coolers and stuff in here, right? I wanted to finish that sheet metal work, so if I needed those areas to make tabs or brackets to, they were done, but I knew that I wasn't finished with it yet. So engine out, engine back in, engine out, engine back in, musical engines. So now let's hang the turbo and the radiator and look at how this is going to start laying out. All right, so this is by far the biggest turbo that I have ever bought or even really been around. That wasn't some giant compound turbo setup on a diesel truck, and I'm excited to see this deal in here, which I kind of already saw it because, you know, me and my buddy Jeff, we were antsy the other night, and I hung that in here after he helped me stick the engine in here. But for the sake of you guys seeing it, this is giant. So this is a VS Racing billet wheel 6673. It is a journal bearing turbo. It is also a very affordable turbo. The reason that I chose this size turbo, one, you gotta have a big turbo. Can't have a small one. But two, because it's close in size to a turbo that most of the fancy FD and rotary guys will relate to. So this is close-ish to a BorgWarner 9180 or a 9280. So let's go upstairs to the command center. I want to show you some data on just compressor wheel sizes and numbers and how this one stacks up in comparison to just some relatable turbos to what you guys have. It'll take 2 seconds. We need to check out the whiteboard. All right, so my lights aren't super conducive to my obvious shadow right here, but let's look at a turbo and I'll explain to you a couple things, and hopefully y'all can kind of understand the size of this thing. So you have a compressor and a turbine wheel right here. They're like conical, right? So you have what's called an inducer and an exducer on both. Inducer, exducer. Basically, think about the inducer as the small side of the wheel and the exducer as the big side of the wheel. So for the compressor, which is your cold side, the boost side, not your exhaust side, and the turbine, which is then the exhaust side, you have various sizes of turbos. Now there's like ARs, there's a lot of complexity to this, but to just give you some sort of a measurable comparison, okay? Because every turbo manufacturer is like 9180 this, but the 9180 doesn't mean that it has a 91 millimeter compressor wheel and an 80 millimeter turbine wheel. That's not what that means. It's just like the pounds per hour, or even like Garrett does like a G35 1050 or whatever, which like the 1050 is the horsepower that it can make. It's impossible to compare turbos unless you're like a super scientist. So here's my layman's way of explaining it. Buzz has a 3582 VS Racing, which means the inducer is 61.5 millimeters, the exducer is 82 on the compressor, and then on the exhaust it has a really small wheel, which is a 61 millimeter inducer, so that's what you see, and a 67 millimeter exducer, which is the bigger side. Okay, so moving to a more common turbo, a BorgWarner 8374 has a 62 millimeter inducer and an 84 millimeter exducer, so almost the same as Buzz's turbo. And on the exhaust side, it has a 62 millimeter inducer and a 74 millimeter exducer. So basically, within 5 to 7 millimeters, the exducer, the big side of it's a little bigger on the BorgWarner than what Buzz has. So Buzz's turbo, albeit a journal bearing, not as optimized, crazy $3,000 EFR, is close to that of an 8374. That's just the math, right? The numbers. So let's move over to the 9180 BorgWarner, okay? 68 millimeter and a 91, 73 millimeter and an 80 millimeter on the compressor side. So over here in this pink square were the 3 turbos on VS Racing's super nice budget website that I wanted to shop on, turbos I was considering. And one thing to consider when you're looking at a rotary is exhaust flow. So the 6673 all the way out here at the end has a 73 millimeter inducer on the exhaust and an 80 millimeter exducer. And then on the turbine side, it has a 66 millimeter inducer and a 92 millimeter exducer. So 68 on the 9180, 92, 91 on the 9180, 73, 73, 80, and 80. So it's almost like the Wish.com version of the BorgWarner 9180. So that's kind of why I've chosen that, is it's going to be a turbo that's going to be more laggy. It's not going to be as streetable, but it's relatable in size to something that a lot of guys know as a pretty easy 500 to 600 horsepower turbo on an REW. So we now have what I'm going to think is not a lot of restriction, but something we can compare to. Back to the car. Now, I've got a few things in my head about how I want to set up the front of this. What I'm installing right now is an OEM RX8 radiator. And you'll notice it basically fits perfectly because the front of my RX7 is now an RX8. We're going to use this little C-clamp to hold this thing up about to where I want it to be. So I think I want to keep it behind the frame horns, and on your factory RX8 there would have been a whole like core support piece that kind of went across here that came up and connected to the top of these fender aprons. Obviously I've chopped all of that out. The one thing to note, the RX8 frame rail, the front of an RX8 in general, is just like way longer than an FD. So like an FD would have probably stopped about back here, and then you'd have had like your bumper support and everything. So when we hang the fenders on it here in a second, so we can look at where the bumper is going to sit to see if I have to chop crazy stuff out for my intercooler, you'll see kind of that relative space constraint that I have. The reason I want to use a factory radiator location for the RX8 is because I can then buy radiators and use RX8 fans, which I have an abundance of, and it's an off-the-shelf part. It's just simple. So I always recommend sustainability in your builds and serviceability, as should be one of the most important things if you're building a race car or a track car, is that you need to be able to find parts for your car. If you use some crazy custom NASCAR radiator and then you smash it into a wall in Kansas, you can't just go to O'Reilly's or a junkyard and get that custom radiator. You kind of have to have a spare at that point. So for me, as a budget guy, this works well because I can go buy another radiator for 400 bucks with an RX8 attached to it and then swap my radiator out the racetrack and keep racing. So, albeit I have finished the sheet metal for the engine bay, I have yet to finish the sheet metal for the inside of the cabin. So this is gonna get, fixed and welded up. I just ran out of plate, so I gotta get some more sheet metal here to be able to fix that. So we're just gonna cover it up with this fender for now. The one nice thing about how I did the front frame horns is that I have one of the OEM FD fender bolts here to kind of index everything, as well as the door jamb bolts and the stuff that's down here. You can tell, like, this fender overlaps the rocker by about an inch from where it needs to be. Nothing fits perfect on this car. Nothing really fits at all on this car because it was literally completely totaled. So who knows if my FD front end is even close to where an FD front end looks like, but you know, I just won't park next to FDs, right? This is RX8, so we're just gonna park next to the RX8 crew because then the FD guys won't be comparing my big turbo and my RX8 engine to their REW, you know, the superior FD chassis here. The RX7 FD/RX8. Sweet. Okay, front bumper time. I'm gonna have a little more room than I thought, but I think I'm gonna have to do some cutting. Maybe. I don't know. I need to fit something I can ram into stuff up here, which is like a bash bar of sorts to help hold the intercooler as well. Because I think I'm just gonna do a big front mount intercooler. I don't think there's any reason to like try to rebuild all of this to some crazy V-mount. Obviously for years on FCs and FDs, people have been doing front mounts. It's not really the most efficient thing, but my car's already chopped up, so I don't feel bad cutting holes in things to do a front mount, or cutting up my bumper, which I think the bumper will be clear. I don't know. I need to zip tie that on and then we'll know. And honestly, what I need to probably do is get a hood so that I can make sure I got the fenders as wide as they need to be, because you're gonna notice here in a second, see how much this bumper is overhanging that fender right there? And ignore my sexy wide body, but I don't think the fenders are necessarily straight because there's nothing on this car that's straight. It's all, like what I welded to it is the straightest part, you know? And then the next step of this, oh yeah, that's way crooked. I think the left fender is lower than the right fender. Definitely, that one needs to come up. Man, I really need to find some doors and stuff for this. So somebody comment below or DM me on Instagram or however that has some like pretty trashy doors and a pretty trashy rear hatch. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to be able to like spray paint it to make it look good. And yeah, FD parts are hard to find. These things are rare. It's not like RX8s. FDs are the opposite of RX8s. It's like you have to buy a $500 part to be able to build an FD like 50,000 times. But for an RX8, if you're an RX8 owner, you just buy an RX8 for the part and it costs $500. So yeah, I don't know. I need to support this a little bit better, I think, because it needs to sit up higher. And I probably should look at how this is going to interface down here, because if I push this up like that, now that bumper seems like it's in a better spot. So maybe I ought to throw a bolt down here in the rocker to get that close-ish. I say bolt. I could probably just use a self-tapping screw and no one will be the wiser, considering this thing's smashed. So for the next step, I've got to figure out which one of these very used intercoolers will fit best in here. I've got this big one, which I think is probably the better option because it's bigger. That small one is actually really nice. It's got cast-in tanks, looks really clean, and this would probably be a better suited intercooler for just the front of a stock RX8. So I don't think that this big one would fit on a stock RX8. So I'm going to keep this for like a buzz upgrade, I think. But this big intercooler, it needs to sit higher than the splitter, I think. I'd like to be able to let air kind of go under it, if that makes sense, like so that there's a gap between the intercooler and the splitter, and then the splitter will direct that air through that gap up into the radiator, just to help give the radiator some priority such that the intercooler isn't stealing all of the airflow. But I think what I've got here, this is just straight, I sat all this in here on jack stands level mock-up. Something like that ought to work. So bringing y'all in for a closer look here, you can see just the proximity. I really think the intercooler needs to sit up here, just a little bit higher. So let me just I'm just gonna jam some blocks under it real quick and then re-show you. Ignore this aluminum bar. I think that's gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to build my own brackets. And I think this might go forward just a smidge. If I tip that forward, I can run a bar across the front of these frame horns, just some round bar like that. And I can just weld that bar in here permanently, and that'll be the permanent radiator structure. And then once that bar's in there, honestly, I could cut out that rear bar because that's really just in the way, but I used it to keep the frame horn straight while I was putting this front end on. And then I'll build an actual bash bar that goes out in the bumper in front of the intercooler. I don't really know if the intercooler will mount straight up off the bash bar or if I'll mount it off of the frame horns or something. I don't know. I really would like for it to mount off the same bar as the radiator, and then maybe I'll add some structure down this side that could double as some ducting or help hold the ducting, because we need to keep all the airflow. Basically, imagine a vertical wall down each side of this, here and here. It'll be easier to show you with this off. But under the frame horn and over, imagine this big duct section in here. And the reason I want to leave this air gap under the intercooler is that this is going to have plenty of priority, sucking all the air out of here. What little bit of heated air will go through the radiator, but I'll have a ramp on my splitter that's going to go up and seal to the bottom of the radiator. And not just the bottom of the actual tank itself, like this you see here is, but have a ramp that goes up and seals to the bottom of the core. So there's no turbulence at the bottom of the radiator here, and all the air goes up through there. So you can really see from this side, like the airflow is gonna come in here, go through the intercooler, and I'll probably seal this section of the bumper off to the intercooler so that all the air from here is going in the intercooler. The air under the bumper will go under the intercooler and then can come up through the bottom of the radiator. And that should give me, I think, enough priority for both, that the front mount isn't heating all of the air that's going to go through the radiator itself. And just like that, this thing looks like a turbocharged RX8 swapped FD. So I'm super pumped with how this has come out so far. It's literally pretty much my first time ever building like a proper front mount setup, but I couldn't be happier with the fitment of the radiator to the turbo. I kind of like guessed correctly on my angle here, and we got all that situated. I ended up just tacking this bar in. I've got to burn it in, but this bar right here holds the radiator. It is just a smidge higher than the factory RX8 radiator, so I like kind of compared with my green car over there. And then the intercooler, I actually left, just like I said, it's free floating now, you can see my brackets. I left all that room from where, if you think of that, you know, aluminum sheet as my splitter, all the air through the center hole will go to the intercooler, and then the air under it will also aid in going through the radiator itself with the ramp. So I'm real happy with the height of that. It looks super nice. The intercooler will be sealed to the bumper, so there won't just be a bunch of turbulence in here, and, you know, air combines the whole deal. The crazy thing is, and I forget who it was, Professional Awesome Racing has like a calculator and all this stuff you can do to kind of size your air dam, like the hole in your air dam, and it really only needs to be 1/3 the size of the cooler. So for example, the radiator, for example, the intercooler is a lot bigger than this opening in the front of the FD, and if I seal off the intercooler here and here to this opening, which now that I look at it, it's really not in the middle. It's in the middle of my frame rails, but I think this whole deal, oh yeah, look at that, to the frame rail, the headlight bucket. And then look at this. Yeah, so this whole deal needs to go that way because the car's not straight. Anyways, back what I was saying. If I seal this here and seal that there, the opening to just the intercooler, like with the dead space in front of it, only needs to be 1/3 the size to cool at speed. So I think we'll be okay because the lower area down here for the radiator is not quite 1/3 the size of the radiator, but it's also going to get the air from the intercooler. So that's a win. Now, intercooler piping wise, I've got plenty of room right here. Let me just grab one and show you for this to fit through there. Now you're like, oh my gosh, it's gonna hit the fan. Well, here, look at this. Does not hit the fan blades. How about that? Literally, intercooler pipes my intercooler pipes don't hit the fan. We're not hitting the fan today. So we got that going. It's got to connect to there. Obviously, I want this to be really nice. So I want to leave room for like a splitter bracket of sorts up here, because this is going to be a little tricky to make that happen. But basically, this will probably come out just a smidge. It's going to fall off. You know, do something in the neighborhood of fitting through here. And then same on this side. I'm kind of, obviously I'll have decided by the end of the video, but I don't like that, just the big 90 degree. So I think what's going to happen, and you'll just have to imagine this, but imagine something sitting about like this, where it's going to kind of come down. And I'm actually going to cut this brace out now that I have the front one welded in. So this brace goes away, and the pipe will come down kind of symmetrically with the other side through this hole, tucked up nice in there. I do have to leave room for oil coolers, because I'd like to get the oil coolers somewhat mounted-ish in this video, or at least have a good understanding of where they're going to go. So let's get the intercooler piping going on and get all this hooked and connected, and then I'm going to pull this front bumper off and we'll take a look at it. Just finished laying some pipe, some intercooler pipes. Check this out. Man, this thing looks so clean. I'll tell you what, let's say it again. I could not be happier with how this is laying out. This is nice. It's good and simple. We have one charge pipe the whole way. I'm almost 100% confident I can get that whole piece out as a unit, so we're going to make it one piece. I personally don't mind 90 degree couplers instead of doing a 90 degree bend and then having a straight coupler. You can get like tight radius 90 degree aluminum pipes, but they're kind of expensive, and the $100 Amazon kits don't come with those. So I just use a 90 degree coupler instead. I mean, if we're gonna make enough boost to explode a silicone coupler, then well, we'll figure that out when we get there, but I don't think we will. So 90 degree coupler on both sides of the intercooler. This is actually just one 90 degree piece that I was able to shorten in some of the bend. Like, turbo's not perfect, intercooler's not perfect, but it's not 90 degrees relative, so I can make that up in this straight coupler a little bit. Just, you can see a little bit of flex there. But check this out. Guess what doesn't hit? The fan. Still got plenty of room to clear the fan, even though I did cut a bunch of the plastic away. And on this side, you now see what's missing, which is that cross member through here. So with that gone, I basically just ran the intercooler pipe right where that cross member goes. No sense in cutting up both sides of the fan. We might as well just only have to cut one side of an RX8 fan set to run it. So what we've got is the RX8 radiator, the intercooler, everything's finished welded. I really want to go ahead and I'm just going to pop the bumper off, and let's look at this with the bumper off. See how we did. Oh. There we go. Cover your ears. That looks nice. I just love how clean and simple that is. Nice and simple intercooler setup. Like, why try to overcomplicate it? You know, why overcomplicate it, ultimately? That's seriously just the ultimate question. So, let's, you know, for full effect. Look at that billet wheel. That really sets it off right there. You pop the cover off the Turbski. We got a big old intercooler. We got a big old turbo, and we have a little baby Renesis engine. Heck yeah. Yeah, I couldn't be happier with that. I made these little tabs here that hold both the radiator and the intercooler. Just really nice. We got the bottom brackets as well. You know, a lot of front mount cars, the intercooler's like not very solid. This thing ain't going anywhere. Like, you could straight up run that into something, and it's just gonna decimate the intercooler, which is not quite ideal for like a drift car, because you really, in my opinion, you'd want to have like some sort of crash structure, you know, that's going to protect this, which I think I probably should make, but I'm counting on my splitter, like having a pretty aggressive splitter like the RX7 does. If y'all have never seen that, I made this like carbon fiber splitter on here. So that's actually chassis mounted, where I can legit stand on it and it doesn't flex, doesn't go anywhere. So it's carbon fiber overlaid, just a dry and then pour resin on it, over 1/2 inch plywood with 3/16 aluminum braces. It's tied to the subframe. It's a super nice piece. So I think I'm gonna make something similar for this, which is gonna help out a ton just with airflow, ducting, And then I used the factory RX8 like duct, you know, radiator shroud side paneling holes. I think I can make at least something that's gonna fit in here to help direct all this air through the radiator. So ideally something that would mount to the side of the radiator, which would keep the air going where we want it to cool the vehicle. So, dang, that looks nice. Man. I mean, you know, I got 3 blue couplers and 1 black coupler, but y'all didn't even notice that until I pointed it out. So, boosty noises. I think I'm gonna have to clean this alternator too. Check this out. It's so dirty. It came out of the trunk of the yellow car that I cut in half to make this car happen, but man, this is so nice. Honestly, this is like, if I painted it beautiful, it would be just as nice as that one. Actually, not even close. That car is really nice. But if it was leftover red, which I don't have enough paint to paint another vehicle the same custom red that that one is, otherwise I would. I really need what leftover paint I have to repaint this if we need it, you know, touch up through the big flares and stuff. So this will be the same stock FD red, most likely. That's my goal. At least something close. Silver engine bay. But dang, look at that. Nice and clean. This is just 2.5-inch intercooler piping, and I've done all the math in my head and on the computer and all the science because I love hydraulics and fluid dynamics. And one of the things is, with intercooler piping, you can go very big, okay? Like we could do 4-inch intercooler piping, right? And like all the big 3,000 horsepower guys have giant intercooler pipes, and it makes a difference at that horsepower. But think of this. Flow is as such, okay? Q, which is flow, equals velocity times area. So when you increase the area, right? Area gets bigger. The Q is gonna stay the same in this system. The Q, we're not changing the turbo, we're not changing the engine, we're not changing anything. We're just increasing the area. What does that do to velocity? It slows the velocity down. If we make the area smaller, the velocity goes up. Now, it gets a little more complicated when you add boost pressure and stuff like that to it, but for the simple understanding of proportion, like area goes up, velocity goes down, velocity goes up, area goes down, etc. So at this velocity and flow, or I guess the Q, 2.5 inches should be fine. I don't think we're gonna see any sort of like power loss from having a 2.5-inch intercooler pipe versus a 3-inch or 3.5-inch or 4 or whatever, right? So fun fact to think about from Mr. Rad, the fluid dynamics guy. But dang, I'm pumped for this. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching the video. This is gonna be the end of this one. I have a bunch of stuff coming. Wiring is gonna start happening fast. The rear fuel cell fabrication is also basically next on my list. Got a bunch of cars going to the dyno, so get excited. I wanna give a huge thanks before we end it off here to the Patreon members, to every one of you guys who goes and checks out the Rad Potential Racing website. We've got rotor trays still on there, rotor stands still on there. Been keeping Josh super busy 3D printing that stuff. In addition to, I'm running pretty low on t-shirts, guys. So there's only a few left. If you want one of them, make sure you get one now. And then also looking forward to the service plates coming soon. So with that, live a life you don't need a vacation from, and keep it rad. We'll see y'all in the next one. Dang. So I guess I'm an FD guy now, because we have an FD with a giant turbo and a front mount intercooler, but it has a Renesis. And then I've got an RX8 with an FD motor. I think it's only fair and correct that we put the best motor from all rotaries, basically, from the factory, besides maybe a 3-rotor, into the best rotary chassis. Peace, guys.